Today is the day that we make space for sorrow. Of course, sorrow is a part of all of our lives in some way, more and more, I think, the longer we live. We know, of course, that sorrow will always claim its space in our lives, and as human beings living in this sinful world, there is very little say that we have in that matter. But there is some say, not whether we have it, but what we do with it. Yes, there are things that we can do with sorrow, and one thing we can do with sorrow, and the Bible shows us this in many places, but one thing we can do with sorrow is bring our sorrow before the Lord. And so we say today that we make space for sorrow as we come before the Lord in worship. We take one day of the 52 that we have in a year to make a space for sorrow on a Sunday morning in the worshiping life of God's people. We know that sorrow comes in many forms. I couldn't even name them all, but we are all familiar with what it means to lose someone, to lose something important, like a relationship that meant so much to us. There is the sorrow of grief, which we name today, which takes so many forms. There is also the sorrow of alienation, of opposition, of disunity, of contention. The feeling that we have that we don't belong, generally speaking, in this world. And I'm sure we all have specific instances we can think of where this general feeling has become crystallized. There is a sorrow of rejection, of disappointment in all of its forms, of unfulfilled dreams for our life, and even unfulfilled dreams that we've had for others, that we wanted to see in their lives. There is the sorrow of regret, of words spoken that can never be taken back, of things, important things we never said, or things we should have done, but the opportunity has now passed. And there are so many more that we could name today. If we have sorrow in our hearts today, no matter what its source, I want to say, and I want us to know, it's okay. It's okay. God knew that there would be sorrow for us as His people. And there was no shame as a Christian to having sorrow. Jesus Himself was called a man of many sorrows, and we follow after Him in so many ways as we journey our path in this world. So today we will open up the Word of God to learn what we can of sorrow with the short time that we have. And I hope that we will all be blessed and in some way be helped by what we find. We are going to make our study from the book of John, chapter 16. And we come today into the middle of the chapter, and really the very middle of what is known as the upper room discourse, where Jesus will spend one last night with the people that He loves so dearly before He faces the agony of the cross. And I want us to see in these verses how Jesus recognizes the inevitable sorrow that His disciples will have as God's will for Jesus and God's will for them come to pass. I want us to see that sorrow is a part of the plan. Look, it is not the plan God has for us, but it is a reality of this world. And so it must be a part of the plan. We will see this right away as we read, I think, and then we will see much, much more as well. And so I think the best thing to do is just to begin. Let's read verse 16 here from John chapter 16. And Jesus tells His disciples, "A little while, and you will see me no longer, and again a little while, and you will see me." So some of His disciples said to one another, What is this He says to us? A little while, and you will not see me, and again a little while, and you will see me, and because I am going to the Father. So they were saying, what does He mean by a little while? We do not know what He is talking about. And Jesus knew that they wanted to ask Him. So He said to them, is this what you are asking yourselves? What I meant by saying a little while, and you will not see me, and again a little while, and you will see me. Truly, truly, I say to you, you will weep and lament. The world will rejoice. You will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will turn into joy. Now we know that Jesus is referring to very specific events that are about to take place when he says these things in the upper room. He said to them earlier that night that he soon would be going to the Father, and that where he was going they could not follow. And so it seems that Jesus has been breaking it gently to them that the time of his death was indeed very near. And besides the obvious inference, obvious to us at least, that this is what Jesus has been telling them, the disciples are confused. Because we are always confused when it comes to something like this. When we are the ones in the situation like this, we have to understand, and I think we can easily understand, what the disciples are going through here when we realize that to their minds, Jesus' time was being cut short. There was no other way for them to be thinking of this, of what he is telling them here. And so we see this bewilderment, the same confusion we would all feel, and I'm sure some of us have felt, when sorrow begins to dawn on us unexpectedly. And as gentle as Jesus has been in breaking this to them up until this point, there comes a point now when Jesus must tell them, yes, you will weep and lament. And I love that Jesus just says it like this, because this is how I take this. Is Jesus informing his disciples of what is going to happen? Sure, yes, he is. But he's also recognizing the inevitability of that, of sorrow in all of our lives. And that's important. And there comes a point in all of our lives when we must realize that there is no escaping this as followers of Christ. Sorrow will come to us. And God does not save us from experiencing the sorrows of this world, both those that are common to all and additionally those that we will share with Christ as we follow in his footsteps. So yes, sorrow will be a part of God's plan for us. But now here's what we really need to see. Here's that last verse we just read in isolation, verse 20. Truly, truly, I say to you, you will weep and lament, but the world will rejoice. You will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will turn into joy. And this is where Jesus reveals the divine perspective on our sorrow and our suffering in this world. You will be sorrowful, he says, but your sorrow will turn into joy. And this is what we learn about sorrow from these words. Just as the disciples' sorrow over Jesus' death would be temporary and eventually give way to the exceeding, all-surpassing joy of the resurrection, so also all sorrow in this world because of that very same resurrection. Listen, all sorrow for the Christian is temporary. There will be a day when every sorrow shall pass away and every tear will be dried. And in the light of this hope, even now in the presence of this hope, sorrow ultimately loses its final say over our lives. And that's not to say that we won't feel the pains of this world as they come one by one. And they will come, but it is to say that our sorrow will be worth it. Not that we will understand just how that can be true right now, given that we are still beholding all of our life in that dimly lit mirror. But what Jesus is saying is that one day, when that day does finally come, there is something that every one of us will most certainly know. We will know that it was worth it. That's what Jesus tells his disciples next. Here's what he says right here in verse 21. When a woman is giving birth, she has sorrow because her hour has come. But when she has delivered the baby, she no longer remembers the anguish for joy that a human being has been born into the world. And as joyful as this is, when a woman brings new life into the world, and perhaps it's the greatest of joys of all of the human experience here on this earth, but how much greater will our joy be than even this, when at last we open our eyes to the life of God's eternal kingdom. So great will this joy be that we will no longer remember the anguish for sake of the joy that we have entered. And I just want to say, I just want to admit that I don't really know, I don't really understand what this means. I mean, I understand the idea that is being communicated here, the concept, but I don't really know what it means that we will forget the anguish of all that we've been through in this world. I mean, I guess partly that is because I haven't yet experienced that joy. But what I do know, and I think we could all agree on this, that of course, temporary sorrow is worth enduring when it brings a greater and lasting joy. And this does not minimize any of the suffering or sorrow of this world that we have experienced. That is the last thing that this is meant to do, but it does put it in perspective. And it also reminds us of something about joy, namely, that real joy in this world can only spring from relationships, and when it comes to our eternal relationship with God through our connection to the Lord Jesus Christ, from that eternal relationship will spring forth in us eternal joy. And that's actually Jesus' point. It's what he tells the disciples in the very next verse, when he says here in verse 22, "So also you have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you." Now, Jesus is talking directly to the experience that his disciples will have when they realize that his death was quite temporary. But the point Jesus makes about Christian joy here is so true across the board. Since our joy as Christians springs from our relationship with Jesus, there is really nothing this world could ever do to take away the joy that we have. There is no sorrow that we could ever face in this world that could take away that joy. Even in the darkest moments of our life, when maybe we can't feel any connection to God at all, it doesn't matter. That joy is still there. Perhaps imperceptible in the moment, but it is a rock and foundation which will not be moved even by the fiercest of life's storms. Joy is not a feeling. Joy is a spiritual reality, which will produce feelings. But I guess that's the thing we understand from this. Even when the feelings aren't there, joy is still there. And honestly, this joy we are talking about today, this isn't even a reality we will totally understand anyways at any point until finally we do see Jesus face to face. But that doesn't change the fact that even now in this life, the greatest joy of life comes from our relationship to God. And that is what Jesus is going to point out to the disciples next as he is preparing them for the sorrow that they will soon face. He says this in verse 23. "In that day you will ask nothing of me. Truly, truly, I say to you, whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he will give it to you. Until now you have asked nothing in my name. Ask, and you will receive, that your joy may be made full." So, this is important that we don't miss this. Jesus says these words to prepare his disciples for the sorrow that they are about to face. Right now, they are bewildered and confused by the pain of sorrow. But Jesus tells them, the uncertainty you feel right now, these questions that you are asking and the separation you feel from me and this confusion, look, this is also temporary. He says, in that day you will ask nothing of me. And what he means is that they will not be asking questions like they are asking now. Questions born from this place of uncertainty that they are experiencing in that moment, as they are realizing the sorrow is about to come. And what Jesus is pointing out is that even though there will be uncertainty in this life, uncertainty is not meant to be an element of our relationship with God. The boundaries of our relationship with God are set because of the completed work of Jesus Christ. And the fullness of our joy in this life comes from the fact that we can and should come before God in every situation and in every circumstance and ask for the Lord's will. And to trust and to know that we will receive from God all of the goodness that His plan holds for us. Once we understand that these verses are in the context of the inevitable suffering of this world and the sorrow that will be with us, then this interpretation becomes clear. And Jesus admits, that He's been speaking somewhat cryptically, but this is what He will also go on to explain in the next part of the chapter. Here's what He says, verse 25. I have said these things to you in figures of speech. The hour is coming when I will no longer speak to you in figures of speech, but will tell you plainly about the Father. In that day you will ask in my name, and I do not say to you that I will ask the Father on your behalf, for the Father Himself loves you, because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God. I came from the Father and have come into the world, and now I am leaving the world and going to the Father. His disciples said, now you are speaking plainly and not using figurative speech. Now we know that you know all things and do not need anyone to question you. This is why we believe that you came from God. And Jesus answered them, do you now believe? Behold, the hour is coming, indeed it has come, when you will be scattered, each to his own home, and will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, for the Father is with me. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Now, these are the last verses that we are going to look at today, and I think that we can see how Jesus really brings to bear these dual realities of the Christian life, of sorrow and of joy. And we know that these are two realities that we live with. Sometimes we feel one more than the other, but that is already something that we've pointed out, that the feelings aren't the main thing. Hey, they are something, right? But the reality of joy and the reality of sorrow are ever-present realities, regardless of which we feel in any given moment. So here's what Christ does for his disciples in preparing them for their upcoming time of sorrow. And here's what he does for us too. He says, look, the tribulation of this world needs to be seen in the light of the joy of my ultimate victory. I mean, that's what he says. He tells them exactly why he's telling them everything he just said. He says, I have said these things to you, that in me, in other words, because of the relationship you have with me, you may have peace. Yeah, you're going to have problems. But here's the thing that's going to get us through. Jesus wins. That's right. God wins. In fact, God has already won. And this is what all of this really means. That when tribulation comes to us in life and the sorrow sets in of all the things we have faced and will face in this world, we must at any cost avoid resting in our own sufficiency. Now, we may be tough. We may be strong. And I look out here this morning and I see a room full of strong and tough and wonderful Christian people. But look, you just can't do it. None of us can on our own strength. Our peace in this world will not come from the fact our peace in this world will not come from the fact that we are strong enough to face the sorrow and the tribulations of this world. No. our peace will come from the knowledge that Jesus was strong enough to overcome this world. And we live in a world of many sorrows, and we make space for that sorrow, but we also make space for joy. Because one day the King will come again, and his victory on that day will be manifest. But until that day comes, we take heart, and we hold on, and we sing songs like, O come, Emmanuel. Now, he came once, he will come again. So we lift up to him every sad song, and every hopeful song, and every song that the heart can sing. And let us sing to him today as we prepare our hearts for the Christmas season.